The first time I saw him, he was just a flicker in my peripheral vision, a fleeting shadow against the backdrop of a dimly lit street lamp. I was walking home from a late shift at the diner, my mind preoccupied with the usual mundane worries. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, my pace quickening instinctively. The air was thick with the oppressive humidity of a late summer night. A low fog clung to the ground, swirling around my ankles like ghostly apparitions. As I rounded the corner onto Elm Street, I noticed him again. The same shadowy figure, partially obscured by the dense foliage of a towering oak tree. He stood motionless, his back to me, as if he were watching something in the distance. A shiver ran down my spine, a primal instinct warning me of danger. I crossed the street, putting as much distance between us as possible. The next time I saw him was a week later, at the bus stop across from the library. I was early, lost in the pages of a dog-eared paperback. The rumble of an approaching engine startled me from my reading. As I boarded the bus, I noticed him sitting alone in the back. He was dressed in a long dark coat despite the unseasonably warm weather. His face was obscured by the shadow cast by a wide-brimmed hat. I chose a seat near the front, my heart pounding in my chest. The bus was nearly empty, save for a handful of passengers scattered throughout the vehicle. I tried to focus on my book, but I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on me. I could sense his gaze, cold and calculating, burning into the back of my head. I risked a glance in his direction, my heart skipping a beat when our eyes met. His face was expressionless, his features lost in the shadows. He held my gaze for what felt like an eternity before slowly turning away. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Later that week, I found myself recounting the strange encounters to my friend, Emily. We were sitting in our usual booth at the back of the diner, nursing cups of lukewarm coffee. Emily, ever the pragmatist, dismissed my concerns as nothing more than an overactive imagination. "You're working too hard," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. "You're letting your imagination run wild." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But deep down, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. There was something about the man's eyes, a chilling emptiness that sent shivers down my spine. "Maybe you're right," I conceded, forcing a weak smile. "It's just been a strange couple of weeks." But the man in the shadows lingered at the edge of my thoughts, a dark stain on the periphery of my consciousness. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was already in too deep. The following evening, determined to prove to myself that I was being foolish, I decided to walk home the long way. The route took me past the oak tree where I had first seen the man in the shadows. As I approached the spot, my heart began to race. I slowed my pace, my eyes scanning the darkened street ahead. The street was deserted, the silence broken only by the distant wail of a siren. The oak tree loomed large in the darkness, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. I stopped at the edge of the sidewalk, my breath catching in my throat. He was there. He stood in the same spot as before, partially hidden by the shadows. His posture was identical, his back straight, his head tilted slightly as if he were listening intently to something only he could hear. I watched him for what felt like hours, but he never moved. Just as I was about to turn and flee, he did something unexpected. He turned his head slowly, ever so slowly, until his eyes met mine. A cold, empty smile spread across his face, and for the first time I noticed his teeth. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. The days that followed were a blur of fear and paranoia. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything but the man in the shadows. His image haunted my waking hours, his cold, dead eyes following me everywhere I went. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and I began to question my own sanity. I heard whispers in the dead of night, soft, sibilant voices just beyond the realm of comprehension. They seemed to emanate from the shadows, beckoning me closer, promising to reveal the truth. But every time I tried to focus on the words, they would dissolve into incoherent mumbling. I knew something was terribly wrong, and I was at the center of it. One night, I woke with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. A cold sweat clung to my skin, and my sheets were twisted around my legs like a straitjacket. The room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside my window. I could hear the sound of my own ragged breathing, amplified in the silence. I sat up in bed, my eyes scanning the room, searching for the source of my unease. At first I saw nothing out of the ordinary. Then I noticed it. The closet door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness peeking out from behind it. I stared at the door, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't remember leaving it open. Slowly, cautiously, I got out of bed and crept towards the closet. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I took a deep breath and threw open the door, bracing myself for whatever horrors might lie within. The closet was empty, but there, scrawled across the back wall of the closet, were 3 words written in what looked like blood. "He's watching you." Panic seized me. I stumbled back from the closet, my heart pounding in my chest. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling so badly that I could barely dial Emily's number. "Emily, you have to come over," I gasped into the phone. "He's here. He's in my apartment." "Calm down," Emily said, her voice thick with sleep. "Who's in your apartment?" "The man," I sobbed. "The man in the shadows." There was a long pause, and for a moment I thought the line had gone dead. Then I heard Emily's voice, small and distant. "I'll be right there." I hung up the phone and sank to the floor, my back against the wall. I couldn't stop shaking. Emily arrived a few minutes later, her face pale with concern. She took one look at me and the blood drained from her face. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I pointed to the closet. "He was here," I whispered back. "He left me a message." The doctor's diagnosis was swift and absolute acute stress disorder, brought on by a combination of overwork, sleep deprivation, and an unhealthy dose of paranoia. He prescribed me a cocktail of anti-anxiety medication and sleeping pills, and urged me to take some time off work. I wanted to argue, to tell him that he was wrong, that there was a man stalking me, a man who haunted my every waking moment. But the words wouldn't come. Deep down, a part of me knew that Emily was right. I was losing my mind. I spent the next few weeks in a haze of medication and forced relaxation. I slept for hours on end, my dreams plagued by shadowy figures and whispered threats. When I was awake, I was haunted by the fear that the man in the shadows was still out there, watching me, waiting for the moment when I would let my guard down. As the days turned into weeks, the nightmares began to fade, and the whispers in the night grew fainter. The medication was working. I was getting better. But a part of me, a small, insidious part of me, missed the thrill of the chase, the adrenaline rush of fear. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself drawn back to the oak tree on Elm Street. I stood across the street, my heart pounding in my chest, half expecting to see the man in the shadows standing there waiting for me. The question haunted me. Why me? What had I done to deserve this torment? Was it simply a case of wrong place, wrong time, or was there something more, some deeper connection that I was missing? I never saw the man in the shadows again, but I never truly escaped his grasp either. The fear lingered, a constant shadow in the back of my mind. I learned to live with it, to compartmentalize it, to push it down into the darkest recesses of my being. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls outside my window and the shadows seem to dance in the corners of my room, I can still feel his presence, cold and calculating, watching me from afar. And I know with a certainty that chills me to my core that I will never truly be free. The man in the shadows may be gone, but the fear he instilled in me, the fear of the unknown, the fear that lurks just beyond the veil of reality, that fear will stay with me forever.